Grace to you and peace, and welcome to our final installment of stories that didn't make the felt board. Psalms are kinda hard to put into pictures, and so a lot of them don't get turned into flannelgraphs. Instead, we have Sunday school students memorize them. How many of us had to memorize Psalm 23, and especially in the King James Version? But the poetry of the Hebrew Bible isn't always fit for children. Just think about it. How many of us had to memorize and be able to recite portions of Song of Songs? Tonight we turn our attention to Psalm 137, a painful and violent poem with specific threats of revenge aimed at children. We're by the waters of Babylon, which means everything has fallen apart. We are somewhere between the end of 2 Kings and the beginning of Ezra, and nothing is okay. By this point in history, the 500s BCE, the Babylonian Empire has conquered the entire Fertile Crescent, which stretches from the Persian Gulf by what today we would call Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran, and stretching up along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and then down along the Mediterranean coast to the Nile Delta. Judah's relationship with their Babylonian overlords was rocky. There were a few ways that empires could control their territories, and the first was to use a heavy fist to impose your own governor and kill anyone who got in your way. We saw the Assyrians do this with the northern kingdom. They killed all of the leaders. They took most of those they didn't kill and sold them into slavery or sent them to far-flung regions of the empire. But the Babylonians preferred to take a different approach. You let the king keep on keeping on, so long as he obeys and pays tribute. But if the monarch led a revolt, well, the solution was easy. You depose him violently, kill him if you have to, and you replace him with a puppet. By the time the Babylonians reached Judah, King Josiah, who was heralded as a second David, had died, and his son Jehoiakim was on the throne. Jehoiakim was no dummy. He submitted to Babylonian rule for a time. But eventually he rose up in revolt, and in 597, the Babylonians overthrew him. They killed him, and his son was also no dummy. He surrendered promptly. He and thousands of other officials, generals, princes, high priests were sent into exile in Babylon. And the Babylonians replaced the king they murdered, Jehoiakim, with King Zedekiah. They placed him on the throne, and he obeyed for a while. But he also rebelled. And his punishment was even worse. His sons were murdered in front of his eyes, and then his eyes were gouged out, so that the last thing he saw was his sons' corpses. The punishment didn't end with the royal family, though. Jerusalem was destroyed, and the temple was left in smoldering ruins. In this context, the 137th Psalm moves from weeping at the water's edge to a pledge to remember the holy city and to rebuild, to a terrifying act of revenge targeting Babylonian kids. I'll let the text speak for itself. By the rivers of Babylon, There we sat down, there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you. If I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they said, tear it down, down to the foundations. O daughter Babylon, you devastator, happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. This poem can be grouped into a few different genres, specifically lament and imprecatory verse. Poetic lament offers a sense of mourning for loss or suffering, and unlike some of the more peculiar forms of ancient Near Eastern and Hebrew literature, laments can be found in poetry across the world and throughout history. And the Hebrew Bible has an entire book dedicated to the mourning the loss of Jerusalem. Lamentations. Consider the opening words of Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? The psalmist then goes on to list all that is wrong. He is but a worm. He is so malnourished that he can count all of his ribs and see every bone. His tormentors are casting lots to divide up his clothing. Or consider this from Psalm 44. You have rejected us and abased us, and have not gone out with our armies. You made us turn back from the foe, and our enemies have taken spoil for themselves. You have made us like sheep for slaughter, and have scattered us among the nations. You have sold your people for a trifle, demanding no high price for them. You have made us the taunt of our neighbors, the derision and scorn of those around us. You have made us a byword among the nations, a laughingstock among the peoples. The Psalms of lament typically move from complaint to praise. That though life is hard now, God will remain faithful and deliver the elect from their affliction. 137, though, makes the turn into imprecation. That is to say, the cursing of enemies. This is a common piece of prophetic literature. Let's consider two prophets who were writing around the same time as the psalmist in 137. Ezekiel, who was active during and after Judah's downfall, writes of the city Tyre. At the noise of cavalry, wheels, and chariots, your very walls shall shake. When he enters your gate, like those entering a breached city, with the hoofs of his horses, he shall trample all your streets. He shall put your people to the sword, and your strong pillars shall fall to the ground. They will plunder your riches and loot your merchandise. They shall break down your walls and destroy your fine houses. Your stones and timber and soil, they shall be cast into the water. I will silence the music of your songs. The sound of your lyres shall be heard no more. I will make you a bare rock. You shall be a place for spreading nets. And a prophet writing under Isaiah's name, but a century and a half after Isaiah, says of Babylon, Your wisdom and your knowledge led you astray, and you said in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. But evil shall come upon you, which you cannot charm away. Disaster shall fall upon you, which you will not be able to ward off, and ruin shall come on you suddenly, of which you know nothing. The Psalms also take up these divine curses. Notably, 109 takes sort of a, and the horse you rode in on approach, cursing and cussing the assailant's father and mother and children. Psalm 109 says, May his days be few. May another take his throne. May his children be orphans and his wife a widow. May his children wander about and beg. May they be driven out of the ruins they inhabit. May the creditor seize all that he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his toil. May there be no one to do him a kindness, nor anyone to pity his orphaned children. May his posterity be cut off. May his name be blotted out in the second generation. May the iniquity of his father be remembered before the Lord, and do not let the sin of his mother be blotted out. So what's going on here? What makes Psalm 137 unique is also what makes it so disturbing. It's the level of specificity. The last lines aren't just a general wish for harm to come to an enemy. May his days be short, may his children be a widow. Or, may his days be short, may his children be orphans. But rather, a graphic image of how that violence should play out. Indeed, the image is so shocking that early church interpreters like St. Augustine of Hippo took a purely allegorical lens to it. The children were not humans, but newly born evil desires, which should be smashed against the rock of Christ. But the text suggests a darker reality. The psalm is about memory. How painful the memory of Jerusalem is, how important it is to cling to that memory. It's so painful that the Babylonians use it to taunt and torment the Judahites in exile, but so important that if they forget it, they ask that their right hand wither. After all, the exile threw Judah into a theological crisis, as well as into a political and cultural one. The temple was supposed to be God's dwelling place on earth. If the Holy of Holies had been destroyed, where was God? And God made a covenant with David that his dynasty would last forever, right? If the heirs of David could be murdered and blinded and sent into exile, was it because God had given up on them? Or with the temple in ruins and the throne empty, had God forcibly been evicted? Was the Lord too weak to protect Judah? Facing these questions then and remembering the glory that was, the specificity of the threat implies that it, too, is a painful memory. That the Babylonians had dashed Judah's children against the stone. And hidden behind this pain and violence is hope. That God will still win the day. That vengeance will belong to the Lord. In Psalm 137, human emotion and desire for vengeance meets hope that the Lord God will still deliver his elect. The end result is certainly not a pretty picture. And this psalm, like so many stories that didn't make the felt board, is a reminder that what is biblical is not always good. But it is also a reminder that even in exile, even in pain, even in our cries that betray our own violent desires, we might still hope that God will deliver us.